of a website, since it is kind of tough for me sometimes to relate to the humor of moms, I slipped onto a mom. All right, and that's mostly women I hear laughing. Okay, yeah, here's guys look at that and say, okay, that's kind of goofy, but let's see the next one. All right, here's the next one. Actual footage of my children getting ready for school. Now, you see, from a guy's perspective, I look at this, and the competitive side of me, I notice the snail that's closest to us. Look at his antennas. I mean, he really wants to cross that finish line first. I mean, he's really stretching. And that's the humor I find in that. But anyway, that's good. That's good. All right, here's another one. No one has more questions than a child who's just been told it's bedtime. Yeah, discovered that to be the case. I would imagine so for most parents in here. Now, this is one that some of you actually are guilty of. Here we go. Sold our house and bought an RV. Kids can't move back home if they can't find it. Yeah, very good. Very good. All right, now, actually, this next one is the one I find the most humorous of all of these. Someone just honked to get me out of my parking spot faster, so now I have to sit here until both of us are dead. It's like, yeah, I felt that urge before. Yeah. All right. Now, this next one, we go from what I consider to be the funniest one to one that I don't get this one. I don't see any humor at all in this next one. My husband was a bit upset because I told him his jeans were in the dryer, and he checked and couldn't find them. But don't worry, I found them. They were in the dryer. I just don't see what's funny with that. So, all right. So now here with this next to last one that I'm going to share, I just need to remind you, I did not write these, okay? All right, so don't be pointing any fingers at me if you feel there's something a little inappropriate about this, but here it is. As a mother of 3, my hobbies include not getting pregnant again. All right, and then the last one, which is one I think a lot of people in here can relate to. The loudest sound on earth is my child asking an inappropriate question about another customer at the grocery store. Yeah, it seems like that's when a lot of things happen, is when you're at the grocery store, right? Well, today we are continuing our 4-part message series that is focused on marriage. And as much as we'd like to hope that things kind of work the way they do in the Disney movies, they lived happily ever after, that little thing right after, a couple sails off in the sunset, they get married, they get hitched, whatever terminology you want to use, that they lived happily ever after. As much as we would like to hope for that to be the case, there's nothing automatic about that. And that's why the title of this series is called Some Assembly Required. It needs our attention because getting married and then things just going great from then on out, no, there certainly is no guarantee of that. I've been thinking about a message that I started the series with, in the last couple of weeks, ever since I shared that first message, which was entitled Defining Love, and I felt like that was a good place to begin this series, because in our culture, we are spoon-fed certain understandings of what love and even romantic love and all of this, what it looks like and it's a far cry from what the Bible teaches. And so that's what our first message in the series was all about, is redefining love, getting better understanding God's definition of what love was. Well, ever since that message, because I felt like I was flying through certain points that really deserved a little more detailed attention. And so I've decided to use this third message in the series to actually do that. So our first point, which doesn't hit a home run, but it's accurate, more insight from the love chapter. I want to go back to 1 Corinthians 13. And I want us to take a closer look, because when I was referring to 1 Corinthians 13, we just kind of saw it, and bang, we were moving forward. But this time, let's slow down a little bit, and let's actually break down two of the verses 4 and 5. We're not going to look at every phrase that is found in those two verses, but we're going to look at enough of them that you'll get the idea of what I think we need to understand. But before I do that, I need to give a little bit of a background explanation regarding Corinth. Because 1 Corinthians, the reason it's called 1 Corinthians is because it is the first of two letters. That's why there's 1 Corinthians and then 2 Corinthians. Paul wrote both of them, and he was writing them to the church in Corinth, okay? So to really appreciate why he includes some of the content that he includes in these letters, it's helpful to understand a couple of things about Corinth. Corinth was one of the largest cities in Greece back in that day. It had been one of the most important cities in Greece ever since the 8th century BC. And so it had been around for a long time, centuries of time. There was a lot of history with this particular city. However, the Romans came along when they were on their quest for world domination, which they were pretty successful at accomplishing. But they came along and they destroyed Corinth in 146 BC. History records that, so we're pretty clear on the actual year that took place. 146 BC, Corinth was all but wiped off the face of the earth. All right, they were pretty much destroyed, and they just, if anything, kind of limped along for a century of time. And then the Romans realized that having a city here, a significant city, has value for the empire, and so Rome rebuilt Corinth in 44 BC. So it was like 102 years later, they rebuilt Corinth. And primarily because it was a major spot on trade routes. And you would understand why if you look at a map and you see where Corinth is located, you'll totally get why that is. And so it was a major stop on trade routes, and it also was, because of that, a major tourist center as well. Well, here's a couple of things I want you to really get about Corinth that helps shed light into why 1 Corinthians 13 is contained in the letter. There were a couple of temples, a couple of Greek temples that existed in the first century in Corinth. One of those was the temple of Dionysus. Dionysus was the Greek god of wine and intoxication. Okay, this is a temple. You can just imagine, your imagination does a pretty effective job in understanding, without me explaining a whole lot, what worship looked like as far as this temple was concerned, what they promoted. Wine and intoxication. And you got to remember, too, since this was a major trade route, is that you had sailors that had spent weeks and many times months at sea. And this was their first opportunity to be on land. And the kind of indulgences and stuff like that they would gravitate toward certainly helped feed this particular temple, the temple of Dionysus. But even more significantly, there was another temple in Corinth. This was the temple of Aphrodite. Aphrodite was the Greek goddess of love. And there were a ton of temple priestesses that served at this temple. And I'm using the kind word there because basically they were prostitutes. Thousands of prostitutes that served at the temple of Aphrodite. And again, understanding the nature of the kind of worship and all of this that they promoted, you get it. They taught that sexual love with them was the way of truth. Okay? So that's a big part of what's going on there with that temple. And that's a big part of the Corinthian culture that exists. All right? So in view of that, Paul is now facing an opportunity to write a letter to a church that has started in that environment, and a large percentage of the people, if not all of the people that were a part of this church, that's been their background when they were converted to Christ, that this has been what they've been exposed to ever since they were young and they were growing up. And so their understanding of what love was all about was a pretty twisted thing. And so Paul is trying to set the record straight. He's trying to help them to have a better understanding for the sake of the way they go about living their lives, for the sake of their families, for the sake of their marriages. He's wanting them to have a better, healthier understanding of what it is that love looks like. And that's why 1 Corinthians 13 is found in this letter. Okay? He's wanting to create a healthy understanding. So let's look at some of the phrases, in particular found in verses 4 and 5. One of the phrases is this: love is patient. Okay, we're going to touch on about 5 of the phrases, and that doesn't even include all of them that are found in these 2 verses, but it does give a good running start at what the passage as a whole is talking about. In the Greek, there was more than one word for patience. But the one that is used here is always used in reference to people, not circumstances. Like, for example, let's say that you were a farmer or something or other, and or gardener, or, I don't know what terminology, you grew flowers and all of this kind of stuff, and that's how you made your living, but yet it's raining and raining and raining, and the weather is cold, and it's just not really conducive to your business, what it is you're doing. Okay, well, you would need to be patient, right? You'd need to be patient that it's going to stop raining and the sun's going to come out and it's going to warm up. All right, that word for patient is not this word. That's not the word you would use here. The word that is used here is always used in reference to people, not circumstances. The word literally means long-tempered. And so when he says love is patient, he's saying, literally, love is long-tempered. It carries the idea of self-restraint. It's referring to slow to anger. Now, be thinking of this as it would play out in a marriage. That's not specifically only what Paul is talking about. In fact, in 1 Corinthians 13, he doesn't even reference marriage there. He's just talking about love. But yet love filters into all kinds of aspects of our life, including marriage. And that's why Titus chapter 2, where it says, older women, you are to teach and train younger women to love your husbands and to love your children. Or Ephesians 5, it says, husbands ought to love their wives as Christ loved the church. Well, in both those passages, it's the very same word as what we see here in 1 Corinthians 13 for love. And so understand that in marriage, the love between a husband and wife, it is patient, okay? That's one of the specifics. I see that wasn't even something that was ever even discussed in that culture. So as basic as we look at that, that was kind of taking a different angle on things from their perspective. But he's not done. In that same verse, he says, love is kind. This is the flip side of patience. Patience endures the shortcomings and the headaches brought on by others, while kindness takes the initiative to reach out and help others when they need help, when they need assistance of one type or another. Unfortunately, most people back in that day and also today are too self-absorbed in their own affairs to take the time to be kind to others. You visualize the story that Jesus told in the Gospel of Luke. He told the story of the Good Samaritan, remember? And what he was defining there is what loving your neighbor looks like. And he tells a story about a guy who was robbed, beaten up between Jerusalem and Jericho and left lying there bleeding and dying, basically, alongside the road. And a priest comes walking along, and the priest sees him. But what does the text say? The priest walks on by on the other side of the road. Okay, he's too absorbed in his own schedule. We don't know what that entails because the Bible really doesn't give us details there. And then a little bit later, a Levite who also his service, his duty, ministry involved temple worship. He was coming from Jerusalem, headed to Jericho, and he sees the man there as well. But the Bible specifically says that he just walked on by on the other side of the road, just passed on by. And then eventually a Samaritan come along. He saw the guy in need, and he, reworked his schedule, carved out time to go over and attend to the man's needs and to take him somewhere where he could get additional assistance and all. You see, and that's what love is. Love is kind. Love reaches out and meets a need when a need presents itself. Love isn't self-absorbed. Regarding a lot of people, that if they were to do something that is kind, unfortunately, there's an underlying motivation that plays a part of it. They have something to gain from it. It's like there's strings attached or something or other. But the whole point that Paul is making in this passage is that's not what true love is like. True love does not have strings attached. True love does not have an underlying motive. True love involves going out of your way for others. Okay? It's kind. All right, here's another phrase found in verse 4. Love is not conceited. The word conceited literally means puffed up. The idea is that a puffed up person is someone who is full of himself or full of herself. They have an overinflated opinion of their own importance. And on that basis, they assume that their happiness and their opinions and their feelings are really what count the most. Now, you can just imagine how toxic that would be to a marriage. If you have one of the partners, the husband or the wife, entering into this relationship and they have the mindset, the attitude that their opinion, their feelings, their happiness comes first, that would do a number on a relationship. And so that's part of why this was such an important teaching point, because love is not self-absorbed. Love is not puffed up. Puffed up people find it easy to dismiss the needs of others and the feelings of others because they're so preoccupied with themselves. But that's not the way it works with people that have true love in their hearts, because they value other people. And it really doesn't matter what race these other people might be. It doesn't matter what side of the tracks these other people may have grown up on. It doesn't matter what level of education these other people. Those are all incidentals and secondary things. That's certainly not primary. Okay? And so he says love is not conceited. Now, to touch on a couple in verse 5. Love is not irritable. This is talking about someone who is reactive. At the drop of a hat, an emotional outburst can be triggered by an annoyance from someone else. The way someone does something, the way someone doesn't get around to doing something, some nervous mannerism that someone has, or something they say that's out of line or out of place, whatever. it triggers an emotional outburst. It's almost like this person that's irritable, it's almost like they are ready to fight in a moment's notice. We've all been around someone like this. As much as we hate being around someone like this, because you feel like you're walking around on eggshells all the time. You know that anything you do, anything you say can set them off in just instantaneously. But a loving person, in contrast to that, puts others around them at ease. When you're in the presence of a loving person with this kind of love, you can relax because you know they're going to cut you a little slack, in view of your imperfections, in view of the fact that you don't always say exactly the right thing at the right time. And sometimes you're forgetful and you don't do certain things that you said maybe you would do or something like that. Well, you know that a loving person is going to cut you a little slack. Others, though, that don't have this kind of love, they very well could be irritable people. And so, boy, you got to be on top of your game 24/7. And because any little slip could cause them to explode. Another phrase. Love keeps no record of wrongs. Now, to what degree you remember some of these other phrases, I think most all of us in here have heard this phrase used before. And this is where it comes from, 1 Corinthians 13, verse 5. The word used here for record, when it says record of wrongs, is the normal word for bookkeeping. And what it's saying is that love does no bookkeeping of wrongs. The idea here is keeping a ledger of each and every wrong that's been committed in days gone by. See, love doesn't hang on to stuff like that. Love doesn't keep any kind of a record like that. When a person keeps dwelling on missteps from days gone by, retelling them, listing them out, keeping score, that's a problem because that's not love. That's not love that's in their heart because love doesn't function like that. So that's just kind of a running start of what's happening in 1 Corinthians 13. He's listing out those five and that many more, even additionally beyond that, of phrases to help define this is what love looks like. Whereas in their culture, they all thought, well, we know what love is. I mean, come on, we have the temple of the Greek goddess here. We know, if anyone knows what love is, we know what love is. And Paul's saying, no, you don't. This is what true love looks like. This is the true manifestations of what genuine love is all about. It's a lot of little things, actually. I mean, all these little things, they amount to something pretty major, but really it is. It's a lot of little things. Combined together, they make a major impact on a relationship. Whether it be the relationship you have with a coworker, a relationship with a friend, with your child, with your parent, but most certainly as well with your spouse. This kind of love makes a major impact. Now, by now you've picked up on it, what the title of today's message is. Okay, I've gotten a little kickback already on that, that some people didn't think that was real funny. They all happen to be females, but I think that's just coincidence there. But if Mama ain't happy, you've heard the phrase before. If Mama ain't happy, ain't nobody happy. And let me just say this. There's a reason an expression like that has stuck around so long. You know where I'm going with this. It contains some truth to it, all right? Whether we want to acknowledge it or not, it contains some truth to it. Now, it's arguable to what degree and all of this. I don't think everything hinges on how the mom and how the wife, feels in the home. But the reality is the atmosphere in the home is greatly influenced by the mom, by the wife. Certainly as much as anyone else, and I think the case could be made more so than anyone else. But you can also argue that the atmosphere in the home, is really dictated a lot by the dad as well. And I get that. And so I'm not going to try to argue that point one way or another. But the point that I do want to say is this, and this is why I wanted to talk about these things today. If this kind of love that Paul is talking about in 1 Corinthians 13, if this kind of love permeates the home and the relationships within the home, you know what? Mama's going to be happy. Daddy's going to be happy. The marriage is going to be healthy. Now, I'm not saying you're not ever going to hit a bump in the road. I'm not saying there's never going to be a struggle or challenge that will rear its head every once in a while, because that's the nature of this thing we call life. That kind of stuff happens. But if this kind of love is permeating your home, and especially permeating your marriage, you are well on your way, to having a healthy, happy, strong home. The best, they've said this for a long time, and again, for the reason, because there's truth to it, the best gift that you can give your children is what? A strong marriage. It's the best gift you can give your kids. And I believe there's a lot of truth to that. And I think 1 Corinthians 13, even though it doesn't mention marriage there, again, it's the very same word, exact word, that is used in passages like Titus 2 and Ephesians 5 that are talking about marriage, and they're using that very same word. So let me give you a little illustration, a little visual here. As far as I told you, this kind of love involves a lot of little things that when you add them up, they make a major impact. Well, let me give you an illustration of this kind of love in action. And who better to represent the illustration than Jesus? He modeled love. Obviously in the big things, because he went to the cross on our behalf. This is love, that he died for us on our behalf. But the reality of the matter is that even in the little things, Jesus modeled love. So this passage in John chapter 13, let me talk about the first half, or the first 17 verses of this, because the word love, the very same word love, is used here that was used in 1 Corinthians 13. And here's the springboard verse launching us into what the text is basically recording. This is the occasion that Jesus washed everybody's feet, all the disciples' feet. But here's the springboard verse that launches the reader into this account. John says this in verse 1. Having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. And when he says to the end, he's talking about the end of Jesus' earthly life. This is the very last full day of Jesus' life. By this time tomorrow, Jesus will have been crucified. Jesus will not only have been crucified, he'll be buried. Okay? So he's at the very end as far as his earthly life is considered. And so that's what that phrase is saying. But it's saying that he loved his own who were in the world. He loved them to the very end. And then John tells this story of how during the Last Supper, Jesus got up during the meal. And he went over and he got the bowl of water and he got a towel. He took off his outer garment and he went around and he washed everybody's feet. There was a conversation or two had during that whole process, but that's what plays out here, is Jesus washing the disciples' feet. Now, the thing that you and I both, we need to understand is that this was a common courtesy back in that day. Because in our culture, this seems kind of odd. Actually, this seems kind of weird. If you were invited over to someone's house later today, so-and-so said, hey, why don't you come by our house about 4 o'clock? We're going to play lawn darts with the old-fashioned darts, metal tips, all of that. Bring the kids. Let's have a lot of fun. All right, so you're invited over someone's house, and you come into their house, and they invite you in. They have some iced tea or whatever, and invite you to take a seat in their living room, and so they bring out some glasses of iced tea. Then the next thing you see is either the husband or the wife comes walking in with a towel and a bowl of water. And they kneel down at your feet and they unlace your shoes and take your shoes off and pull your socks off. And they start washing your feet. Now, what's going on in your mind at that moment? I mean, you're kind of freaking out, right? You're just like, okay, what is this all about? I was thinking yesterday I needed to clip my toenails. I really wish I would have done it. Now, everybody sees them, right? And so they start on your spouse. And you're sitting there, and you're just like, I think I left the headlights on in the car. I'm going to go check. You're trying to get out of the room because this is really a weird deal that's happening. I mean, in our culture today, that would be kind of the way we're looking at it. But for them, back at that time, it really wasn't anything unusual. In those days, foot washing was just something you did when people came over to your home. It was an act of hospitality. It was a part of receiving them warmly. And part of the reason for that is the kind of shoes that people wore back in those days. Part of the reason for that is because the majority of the travel that people did was on foot. Part of the reason is because there was so much dirt around, and so people's feet were dirty. And so if you wanted your guests to feel welcomed and comfortable while they're at your house, just a social event or for a meal or whatever, this is something that you did. It was usually the job of the servant, the lowest servant, if you had multiple servants in your home. Now, if you didn't have any servants in your home, then it was the host that would do this. The thing to understand that oftentimes gets missed is that this was meeting a very real need. This was not Jesus beginning a ceremony, a religious ceremony. That's not what this is about in John 13. Now, some groups, they take this and now they incorporate it into one degree, one frequency or another as far as into some of their religious services. And that's fine if they want to do that. But you can't use this passage and say, well, we're doing it because we are being told to do it. You really got to be careful about that. Because Jesus wasn't starting a ceremony. I understand when Jesus got all done, he said this, I have given you an example to follow. Do as I have done to you. Now, what was it Jesus did? He loved them to the very end. And part of what that means when you love someone is you will reach out, go out of your way, and meet whatever the need is at that moment. If it's within your ability to rise up and meet that need, you're going to do that out of the kindness of your heart because that's what love does. And so Jesus is saying, okay, what you've seen demonstrated for me, this is the mode you need to live in. You need to have the radar on all the time, that you are aware of your surroundings. And when needs present themselves, that is within your ability to do something about, you do it. Because that's what it means to be a loving person. You see, and I'll say this, and initially you're going to take it in a literal way that I don't intend it. But foot washing will never go out of style because you'll never run out of dirty feet. And when I say that, I'm not ultimately talking about feet. Foot washing will never go out of style because you're never going to run out of opportunities to meet needs that are around you, in your neighborhood, in your workplace, in your home, in your marriage. See, and that is what's being illustrated here for us. There will always be reasons why you can't. There will always be something you can come up with that's like, oh, I'm just too busy, my schedule's too crowded, I just can't for this reason, I can't for that reason. Jesus could have come up with a whole slug of reasons when you stop and think about it. Jesus could have said, you know what, don't pin this on me, I can't do this, my food will get cold if I get up from this meal. Now, if we had done this before the food got served, but now that the food's been served, it's just going to sit there and it's going to get cold. Okay, he could have argued the point. Obviously, he didn't. He could argue the point, it's not my responsibility. This is someone else's responsibility. The servant of the home, servant of the place. The person down on the totem pole, they're the person to do that, but he didn't argue anything like that. He could have said that, hey, all right, let's take a vote. Who's the most important person in this room? Well, he's the Son of God, right? Okay, well, there should have been like a dozen other people that would have fallen in and done this before he would have. I mean, he could have taken that angle if he wanted to. Jesus could have argued, this is my last full day of life, guys. I'm down to a few hours. In fact, a few hours from now, I'm going to be arrested, and I won't even be in control of the last few hours of my life. Surely you don't expect me to spend what little free time I have right now washing feet. But he didn't take that approach. Jesus could have said, I've still got some important teaching to do. And he did. I mean, Jesus went on to say, I'm the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. I mean, that was a pretty significant teaching point he made. Jesus later taught about heaven. He said, my Father's house are many rooms. If it were not so, I would have told you. I'm going there to prepare a place for you. Jesus talked about the Holy Spirit. I mean, there's a couple chapters contained in John's gospel about that teaching that happened after this moment. Jesus talked about the vine and the branches, and I'm the vine and you're the branches. You need to abide in the vine. You know, that whole teaching point in John 15 is yet to play out. So he did have a lot of important things to teach, but he didn't use that angle on this because Jesus wasn't looking for excuses. He saw a need, and he rose to the occasion and met the need because that's what love does. That's what love does. And isn't that exactly what Jesus did when he went to the cross on our behalf? I told you this love, this type of love that's being spoken of in these passages, it involves a lot of little things. Well, obviously an argument could be made, well, Jesus going to the cross wasn't a little thing. That was a major thing. And indeed it was. Jesus temporarily set aside his glory in heaven and clothed himself with human flesh and became a person and a human being and lived among us. And ultimately for the purpose of offering up that ultimate sacrifice on your cross, on my cross. And we always say it's his cross. That's our cross. He died on because he never did anything to deserve being crucified. That was our cross. So yeah, he rose to the occasion and did something major. But what was it that was generating, motivating, compelling him to do that? Love. Love. The same thing that caused him to get up from the table and to wash their feet. Our ushers are going to be getting up at this time and preparing for communion. And while they are, I want to show you one last slide. 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 7. And again, it's talking about in marriage, and it's just, additional concepts that are being used. This passage says, husbands, in the same way, be considerate as you live with your wives and treat them with respect. And that's part of what love is all about. It's being considerate of one another. It's showing courtesy for one another. That's where having a servant's heart begins, is in the home. In some respects, it would almost be easier to step out and serve someone that you don't know, a total stranger, because you'll probably never see him again. And that's part of what having a servant's heart does. But it needs to start in your home. It needs to be a mainstay component of the relationship you have with the people that live under your roof. Married people are notorious for taking their spouses for granted. And if we're going to be truly honest in here, whether you've been married 5 years or you've been married 50-some years or even longer than that, if we're going to be real honest, most of us in here would have to admit guilty as charged. There have been periods of time in my life, and maybe even right now, where I'm taking my spouse for granted. Yeah, married people are notorious for doing that, the people who are closest to them. And again, we're not just talking about big major things. We're talking about a lot of little things that make a major impact. We need to pay more attention to the people around us. We need to have our radar on. We need to show courtesy and respect. And when the occasion arises, get up out of our seat and do what is within our power to do to meet a need. Why? Because that's what love does. That's the nature of love. Let's pray. Father, I thank you for the opportunity this morning to talk about a topic that we know is near to your heart, Lord, that Jesus modeled over and over in his life and demonstrated in ultimate fashion with what happened on the cross. Father, we celebrate your love. We celebrate it. Father, I pray that through your Spirit we'll be inspired by it. That it will flow, your love will flow into our lives and through our lives and touch the lives of people around us. Whether they be people we know or not is secondary. But might it include the people that we work with? Might it include the people that make up our family? And might it certainly involve our spouses if we're married? Lord, help us to be more loving. And in so doing, might that be a demonstration of our gratitude for the incredible love you showed for us through what happened on the cross. While we take the bread and the cup, we reflect on that and we celebrate that. And we ask you do a good work in us and through us because of that. It's in Christ's name I pray. Amen.